Hi guys, Talysha from P3 here. Thank you for joining me for another episode. I know it's been a minute since I caught up with you last. There's been me recovering from COVID so I could go over to Japan and help with the P3 platform launch there. So it's been a few weeks and I'm relatively recovered, well rested. Japan was amazing. I'll fill you in on about that another time. And today what we're going to be covering is a P3 community question that the timing is very, very good considering it's the end of year and a lot of podiatrists have just finished their studies. So it came through on one of our Instagram Q&As that we had a number of weeks ago, and it was someone wanted to know what we felt the ultimate balance was for new grads when it comes to money, education, lifestyle, good hours, colleagues, and so on. So that's what we're going to be tackling today. So the short answer is there isn't an ultimate. It's very individual. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. But the long answer, again, very individual, and some self-reflection is required to answer this. But within my long answer that we're going to tackle today, hopefully it'll help point you in the right direction to finding your ultimate balance. So let's get stuck into it. The Progressive Podiatry Project, here to share knowledge, insights and information for you to improve your clinical practice and, most importantly, help you help your clients. So in order to best answer this question, yes, we're going to get a little bit philosophical today, but there's going to be three things that I explore that are all somewhat interrelated. So the first is Maslow's hierarchy of needs that has been adapted to fit into the workplace. Then there's what I call the 5 work love languages, and then we have our deal breakers. Now, why I've blended the three of these together is that yes, there is the hierarchy of needs that exists and that fundamentally matter to everyone. There, however, is some differences between a nuance between each individual. So differences as far as our intrinsic reward system, our motivators, things that will engage us or repel us. And our deal breakers are also different. And the deal breakers will often come into play when we are talking about our work-life boundaries, which I think it's boundaries, not balance. And again, we'll cover that later on. But we all have differences in what matters more to us in these realms outside of the baseline essentials that make up the hierarchy. So when we read about the 5 love languages that exist, a large part of this is an emphasis on our understanding that even though two people can have a different love language that shows them that they're loved and accepted, essentially meeting their emotional needs to feel safe and secure in that relationship. If you have an understanding of the other person's language, you can meet those needs and have a successful relationship, even if there's 2 differing languages that exist between both parties. Now, taking this concept and applying it to working relationships, it actually works very similar, and it sort of speaks more so to compatibility. And so because one workplace may be really compatible for one person and it may be a complete nightmare for someone else. And the languages are kind of the nuanced approach and take on the hierarchy. And what we're going to do first up, before we even get into deal breakers, and we'll explore the love languages in a minute, but first up we're going to tackle the hierarchy and what it's made up of. So quite a number of years ago, Abraham Maslow argued that humans are motivated by 5 essential needs. And that's physiological needs, safety, social needs, self-esteem, and self-actualization or self-fulfillment. Those 2 terms are often interchangeable. Now, there's another entire realm where Maslow's hierarchy has been applied to the workplace, and that's the hierarchy of employee engagement, which we'll tackle in another episode, because in order to do it justice and really explore it more, I do need a lot more time, and trying to briefly tackle that and what else we've got planned for today, it just won't work. So definitely I will tackle in another episode, but it does flow on. So if we're not having our needs met, then it subsequently will lead to disengagement and levels of engagement being impacted. So I very much do want to follow up with that episode at a later date, because I think it will be very insightful, especially for employers if you are having issues with staff retention. And I have had a few coaching sessions with people, especially over the last 12 months, with they may have had employees that have joined the practice, and then after 9, 12, 15 months, they move on somewhere else, and they can't seem to get a handle on or gain traction and have people staying. And it seems to be the same pattern where it's not that the employment relationship ends in this flaming disaster. It's more so it just peters out, and that's oftentimes because there's this sort of undercurrent of fundamental needs probably not being met. So that incompatibility that I was speaking to before, that's one thing. If we're coming at it during the initial stages of an employment relationship, so whether or not we're advertising for a job or we are seeking a job, so we're interviewing for it, if we have an idea of all of these concepts I'm going to be talking about today, then you can kind of weed out whether or not a job may or may not be compatible for you even before you get into it, and have that little snowball effect of resentment and disengagement starting. So basically, tackling the hierarchy in the realm that we're talking about today, at the bottom of the pyramid, we have our physiological needs. And when we're talking about the original hierarchy from Abraham Maslow, the physiological needs are things like food, water, sleep, and warmth, the real basic needs that we have as humans. Then next up in the hierarchy is safety, and this includes just comfort, security, stability. And I probably would say physical safety is probably up there with the physiological part. Anyway, so moving on from there, we've got our social needs, which is our sense of belonging, community, and friendship. Then up above that, we've got our self-esteem, which is our positive self-image. Some people like to think of it as like prestige or status. And then lastly, at the tip of the pyramid, which is sort of the least theoretically important out of the hierarchy, is the self-actualization or self-fulfillment. So that's where we can generate those feelings of being fulfilled through growth and advancement and creativity, so that ability to flow and express ourselves. So if we translate all of that into the work sphere, what it would look like is, say we're at the bottom of the hierarchy, so the most important, which is our physiological needs, and that can be the space that we work in. So the clinic space, the clinic setup, and our access to essential facilities. Do you have somewhere where you can go to the bathroom? Do you have somewhere where you can do your notes? Do you have somewhere where you can eat your lunch? And also coming into this from the work sphere is our pay. Are we getting regular remuneration? Which also I feel blends into safety or security, I should say. Again, like I just mentioned, whilst the hierarchy places safety in the next tier, I would say that physical safety is essential and should be in the most important realm. So are you physically safe in the workplace? Are you going to be coming in contact with clients or people that may physically put you in harm's way? Which I have had work experiences where that's happened. And for me, that's quite an important need. So it was not an enjoyable experience. And then even my employer's response to that was very nonchalant, and there wasn't a care factor there. So it was a very quick fast track mixed in with, I'll probably mention, not the employer itself, but this working situation that occurred as a really good example of not having your needs met and a fast track to disengagement and resignation. But essentially physical safety. And then, so when we're talking about the safety and security, which is next in the tier, there are a few elements that will play into this from a work perspective. So there's the physical safety, as I mentioned, but also from in our working environment. So the workspace, think of it as from a work health and safety perspective. And then there's also the security aspect. So think of it as like the employment arrangement perspective. Is there a formal contract in place? Do you know that you will definitely have a job for the next 6 months, or are you going week to week? And then other things that feed into this. So do you have superannuation being paid? And depending on what country that you're in, are there other benefits that are included? And then next up is the social element, and that's the social elements of our working environment. Do we have an environment where we can engage with our co-workers? Are we able to have a little bit of fun and just have some of that social engagement to build that sort of sense of community within our organisation? And that's not to say that we have to be best friends with our co-workers, because I do think issues can arise where that line gets blurred, because at the end of the day, it is a business, and sometimes business decisions don't align with personal allegiances. So it can muddy the waters a little bit there. But anyway, so essentially it's just, and everyone's social needs are a little bit different, because myself as an introvert, I don't feel like I need a huge amount of social engagement. Like, yes, I want to work with colleagues that I can be friendly with and have a little bit of a chat to, but I don't really want to be spending time out of hours with work colleagues. I don't want to do a huge amount of social functions. There was one workplace I worked at that it affected your brand if you weren't engaging in a lot of the social activities, or if you ate lunch alone and all of these things. So the environment there was kind of fostered around people who were extroverted and just wanted contact with everyone all the time and wanted loud people and engaging people, which that wasn't me. So I really didn't enjoy that. But anyway, moving on from there is the self-esteem. And so when we're talking about self-esteem in the workplace, this is often feedback. And one thing that happens all too often, because humans tend to be negatively biased, a lot of the time employers will only provide feedback to their employees when something goes wrong. And if you're only getting told about the things that you're doing wrong, which might make up 1% of your work, and then we're ignoring the 99% of things that you're doing correctly, that in itself chips away at your self-esteem, and you're feeling like you're able to make a valuable contribution to the workplace pretty quickly. And the other things are recognition, and some of the other things that feed into people's feelings of positive self-esteem is if they're given additional responsibilities. So we don't always have to communicate with praise and awards and being over the top with someone doing a good job. Another way that employers can communicate to employees that they're doing a good job, which is a positive feedback thing, is if we're giving them more responsibility. So if you're given more responsibility, typically that occurs because you're doing well at your other tasks. So those things feed into this. And then when we look from an employment perspective at the self-actualization or self-fulfillment, this is where it may be something like our personal development plans, our training, mentoring, our ability to be promoted and develop our career within the workplace. And so another thing is even just having your ability to contribute ideas or contribute or expand out into other areas within the organization. So what that may look like is if you're given access to the social media accounts, or you're asked to create posts for social media or the website. So being able to put your little bit of a spin or contribution into the workplace. Now, when we look at the work love languages and take the items from the hierarchy, but move them out of the hierarchy and view it more as a matrix, and why I like to move out of the hierarchy way to view things. So even though there are some things that are fundamentally very important, like safety, regular pay, financial stability, everything like that, they're the essentially important things that we need those needs met. But then where the matrix comes into play are those sort of flexible areas that resonate and have more meaning to us and our sort of sense of fulfillment and engagement within the workplace. And the reason I like to think of it more of a matrix is because it does vary significantly from person to person. So with this variation, I'll use myself as an example. So I'm not hugely financially motivated because it's like, as long as I have enough money coming in that I can cover the bills, basically, I'm happy because there's other things that are more important to me. So the ability to be creative and get into a workflow and contribute new ideas and all of that. So an example, one organization I worked in that wasn't podiatry, was I was in a role that it was, even though there was some flexibility to have your personality as part of your role, everything else was very dictated, and it wasn't very person-centered with the people that you were actually dealing with. So you had very little influence or control over what you were doing because it was so regimented, which fair, that's how that industry works. So fair play, I just wasn't compatible for it. But I was really not enjoying that. And I had a discussion with some upper level management about the potential to move into a different area within the organization, because even if it was just a new challenge, a new way to use my brain, I was really craving that, because even though the work I was doing was exceptionally busy, it was boring as hell because it was just the same thing day after day, and there was very little use of my brain. So the pay was a lot better, but there was little creativity. So I wanted something new. So I asked if I could potentially move into a different area within the organization, which the response was basically like, you can, but it would be about a 16 grand pay cut. And I was like, I don't care, because that pay cut, it still would have very much paid my bills. And the ability to at least be mentally stimulated again was a bigger draw card for me. But essentially, like a lot of big organizations, things move slow, and if I'd sort of self-reflect on that, I was already checked out and just completely disengaged, to the point I don't think I could have come back from, regardless of what happened. So I just ended up resigning. Anyway, enough about me. So that's looking at the hierarchy, but now I'm just going to take those bits and pieces, and we're going to look at it kind of from the matrix point of view and how it really does apply to the workplace. So with today's talk, it's very much focused on the new grad or the potential employee perspective. So I probably will do another episode where we can kind of tackle the perspective from an employer, but either way, taking in this information will probably be helpful regardless of what side of the fence you're sitting on. So when we're looking at pay and remuneration, from a new grad or an employee perspective, I think it's very important to get very, very clear on what you will or won't be happy with. So this is, do you want sort of full-time pay plus benefits? Are you happy with part-time? Are you happy with casual? Are you happy with contract? Do you have a minimum amount of money that you need to earn week to week to be able to survive? Are you more bonus orientated or financially driven? So are you looking for a job that has a base salary and a potential for really high bonuses being available? Like, that's not my kettle of fish. That's fine. Everyone's very different. But some people, financial motivation is a big factor for them. And there's no right or wrong answer to this, because if we sort of swing back to like the original love languages, I would equate it to the gifts. So I'm not a big gift giver. I don't have a lot of material possessions. I don't really care about material possessions. Other people do, and that's completely fine. We're all different. So that's one thing that I think it's very important for new grads or any potential employees to get very clear on, because I think you should get clear on what you want, because if there's a few things that are essential to you and you negotiate on them or compromise on them when you really don't want to, it is a very fast track to resentment, which will lead to potential disengagement and then resignation. So a good example of this is, a few years ago, I joined a clinic that a lot of the elements of this job were very compatible with me. There was a high degree of autonomy, all these other things. But they wanted to put me on a percentage contract, and that I really didn't want to do, because especially coming from building up my business from scratch years ago, I know how exhausting it can be to build up your own patient list. So it is different if you're going into a contract arrangement and there's an established patient list. But when you're coming into another clinic and essentially you're starting from scratch, you've got to build your own patient list up. If you're financially not in a position to do that, or you're just emotionally exhausted from already having done that before, but then compromising on that, it's a very fast track to not enjoying what you're doing. So I really, at that point in time, just wanted an hourly rate. I didn't really care about bonuses. I just want to know if I work this many hours, I'm going to get paid this much. And then I don't care if your profit margin is a hell of a lot higher by doing that and you're making more money off me. I don't care. I just wanted that financial stability. But that wasn't on the cards. I compromised, and it didn't take long for me to resent agreeing to it. So if you're someone who financially needs security and a base level of pay, then, and because it's essential for you to just live, I wouldn't compromise on that. So if you do compromise on this for something that may in theory look good in paper, you have to be aware that you're potentially setting yourself up for a very large stressor in the future, and it may not be that far into the future, because especially if you're walking into a position where you've got to build up your own patient list. One, I experienced it at that clinic, but then also when I open my own clinic, anything you think will happen, you'll probably build it up to being full-time, but it will probably take you a bit longer than what you thought or expected. So for me, in this clinic situation, I actually built up quite quickly. So it was probably within about 2 months. I was at a level I was happy with, but it was a hell of a lot of work to get there. And so the second time around doing it, I just didn't enjoy that. So no more contract pay for me. Anyway, so with this, it's just get clear on what you definitely want and need in that situation. And then think of it compatibility-wise. So is the employer offering something that is aligned with that? If it's a no, then you really should be thinking that it should be a no for your decision to work there. Because if we go back to the hierarchy, like having that base level of pay, especially in the environment that we're living in now, where a lot of people are financially not in great positions. And underemployment is also something that is very rife, especially in allied health, when you've got these sort of contractual arrangements and even just casual or part-time arrangements happening. Because even though, yes, there might be a lot of people that are employed, there's employment, but then there's also underemployment where, yes, you may have a job, but is the job that you're working in actually meeting your financial requirements? For a lot of people, the answer is no. Now, next up in the matrix, when we're looking at it from the work perspective, and I feel it's very important for new grads, is mentoring, coaching, and that one-on-one support. So as new grads, our needs for this are often a lot higher than what even we often think they are. But even aside from a new grad, some clinicians want and need the mentoring and coaching, and that's 100% fine. There's some employers that really enjoy that aspect of their work, and so it doesn't matter what stage of your career that you're in. If you want it, you should seek it, and I think that you deserve to have it. And it's something that, some employers and, even some employees, they're just seeking to continually expand and learn and develop their skills. So I find, for me, having that mentoring and coaching part is probably, aside from having the base level of financial needs being met, that's something that I probably value more so above the financial support. And even from an employer perspective, when I had people working for me, that's how I would approach it. It would be everyone had their base level of pay. There may be some level of bonus involved, but then there was a lot of time that I would invest into the employees and provide that mentoring and coaching, because that's something that the people that were working for me, they valued, and it was something that I valued very much as well. So, and this is where that compatibility comes into play, and it can help with our decision-making process on if we're compatible with that organization or that clinic. So if you need that time investment and then it's not there, then that's also a fast track to you leaving the clinic. So if it's a clinic where it's a sole practitioner, they're very busy and they're not able to provide you with that one-on-one support, then especially as a new grad, it can make things a little bit difficult because you may be just completely left to your own devices. So it doesn't mean that you need to be working alongside them day in, day out, but just having that regular contact and support, whatever that may look like. Because I know there are some clinics, and even my clinic, when I first started employing people, it was out of one treatment room. So obviously we weren't working at the same time, but I would try and make an effort to be at the clinic quite a lot throughout the week when I wasn't seeing patients, but they were. But then also just being available throughout the week and then having those regular face-to-face sessions outside of treating patients. So for a new grad, think about what you would like and need. So is it regular feedback? Is it one-on-one time? Is it the ability to learn from people or observe and just upgrade your skills? And see if it's available in the clinic and the role that you're being offered. So if it's not, then I would err on the side of caution. But a little bit of a caveat to this is if it's a job that fundamentally meets your other needs and they're open and upfront about the fact that they may not be able to provide that one-on-one support or time for you, but you do have the availability or the ability to seek that elsewhere. So I think it's great to have mentors from outside of your organization, as long as there's not a conflict of interest, but learning from other people. So if you're in a role where you might be somewhat solo and not having a lot of that direct mentorship or coaching from your employer, but you are able to seek it elsewhere from other mentors, then that might work for you and that can be okay. So it doesn't necessarily have to be directly from your employer, but is that job that you're taking going to allow you to explore that with another mentor? So that's probably a little exception to the rule, but essentially just be understanding of what your needs are as far as how much guidance that you need. So especially if you have some big areas of uncertainty when it comes to treating patients. So most new grads, biomechanics, musculoskeletal practice, a lot of things like that. It takes a lot of time to sort of build up the confidence within treating patients like that. So if you're someone that clinic has a large musculoskeletal base, but there's very little in the way of support to build your skills there, and have some guidance, and it's a weak point for you, that should be sending off a couple of little red flags for you that it may not be a compatibility match for you. So next up we have the social aspects, and this is an area that I feel very much that personality types will often come into play. So like I used the example earlier on in today's episode, so for myself, I'm quite introverted, so I don't need a huge amount of those social aspects of work. Like I was saying, I don't want to spend a huge amount of time, or any time really, outside of work with colleagues that, especially, like it's different if you occasionally find your work wife, where you know that outside of the work environment, if you met them in everyday life, you would be friends. That's different. But that's a work wife. That's just not a colleague. But when you've got a colleague that you know, if it wasn't for the workplace, you probably wouldn't hang out because you didn't have much in common. I don't want to be put in situations where I have to endure that a lot because being quite introverted, my social battery runs out very quickly. And situations like that they're not for me. I don't enjoy that. Other people though, who are more extroverted and love just networking and getting to know everyone and anyone, they thrive on that. So it's very much, there's no right or wrong answer here. Again, it all comes down to that internal compatibility we have with different organizations. So for me, having a quick 5-minute chat throughout the day just with different colleagues, that's quite cordial and that's fine. That's enough to fill my social battery in that realm. But again, depending on what level of importance it holds for you, that's something that you can ask about. So some employers are quite good. They know that their strong suit is the social engagement that they provide and the community that they build within all the employers within their organisation. Like, I'm not saying I'm anti being part of that. I do quite enjoy that, but when it's quite forced and it's something I don't enjoy, I like the option to not have to participate if I'm feeling a bit drained. But anyway, we're not talking about me. So some employers will very much advocate or advertise this in part of the draw card for joining their clinic. And I think it's great when they do that because, again, it sort of highlights, if this is something that sounds good to you, come and join our clinic, or at least look at joining our clinic, because, again, coming down to compatibility. So if it sounds like your idea of sweet hell to do that, then maybe that's not the clinic for you. So it goes both ways. So some clinics, yes, are very big on staff engagement and social events. Others, not so much. And again, no real right or wrong answer there because different strokes for different folks. But it's being aware of what you need and then what they can offer, and vice versa. So other social aspects outside of just maybe the work environment and the social engagement that may be provided, it can be hard to identify when you're just looking at joining a clinic or organisation and you're not actually in the mix. This is where it pays to be as observant as you can. So when you're possibly going for an interview or seeing a clinic, just observe how the other workers or employees there interact and the general vibe of the place. It can actually be quite telling. So let's just say if you're in the waiting room and the support staff and even the practitioners, if they're coming out, if they're being professional, but there's a really good vibe and it seems like there's a nice, relaxed, sort of jovial, sometimes a little bit of banter between the staff and it feels quite relaxed, that's a very good sign. On the flip side, if you've got some interactions where one staff member walks in and they might be a little bit tense. So if you've got some reception staff that they seem to be getting on quite fine, then all of a sudden a practitioner walks out and everyone's kind of on edge, they go quiet, and that's a really big tell. It's very subtle, but it's a very big tell that there's potentially not a very good working environment there. So it may be bordering on that level of toxicity that very much does exist. So again, this one's a little bit hard to pick until you're actually in there, but that's where we sort of have a look at all of these elements and just be very aware. And one thing that I feel that when we're looking for a job, instead of it being very much focused on I need to put my best foot forward and make sure I'm the right fit for this job, when you're going for an interview, I think it very much pays. You're also interviewing the employer. Are they suitable for you? It's not just you being suitable for them. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. So jumping on from this, so another piece of information that if you're not able to do that little bit of observation, but you are aware of other people that have maybe worked at the organisation, and depending on where you are, if you're in a town or city that you've been there for quite a while, and especially if we're looking at podiatry, but even physiotherapy, they're not the biggest professions in the world, especially podiatry. So there's a lot of people talk, but it doesn't have to be gossip. But a lot of the time people are somewhat aware of who else is in the profession. So sometimes you can find out information quite easily. Big indicator that even if you can't observe that there may be sort of levels of toxicity or just a lot of fundamental needs not getting met is staff turnover. So that's a really big indicator of staff or the culture of the organisation and or all of those fundamental needs being met that we're exploring. So if you've got a clinic that has clinicians or receptionists that just come and go quite frequently, so a very high degree of turnover, you can almost guarantee that there is a fairly entrenched cultural issue within the organisation. So and as much as I've been guilty of this, but I know other people have fallen into this as well, as much as we like to think that we will be the exception to the rule, very rarely are you the exception to the rule. But sometimes you can, if a lot of the other fundamental needs are getting met and there's a little bit of a cultural issue, you may be able to thrive in that environment. But if you're someone that, it's just, again, a lot of self-reflection and looking at these compatibility factors will play into it. Yes, a lot of nuance, but again, that's why this episode is more of a guidance instead of a definitive answer. Okay, so the next part is what I would say is career progression. So with career progression, when we're working in private healthcare practice, there's usually a fairly limited way that we can get promoted, which is what a lot of people think that career progression is. But there's so many other avenues that exist for this. And it does or may potentially change somewhat between a new grad versus an experienced clinician. But I think it's equally important. It just may look somewhat different to people in different stages of their careers. So when we're talking about, this will be from like the private practice lens to give you a little bit of an idea of where your potential employer sits as far as career progression, but also you getting a little bit real on what you feel that you need in order to fulfill that need for progressing your career. Some people don't have any interest in progressing their career. They just want their job. They just want that paycheck and they're happy with that. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Other people need to continually move, and even if it's not moving up the food chain, it's just learning a new skill, developing their skill set, expanding their knowledge base. And I very much would say I fall into that category. So even if I'm still working within the same role, being able to bring as much new information and new skills into that role, I find very important to me. So as a new grad or a person seeking employment, there's a couple of ways that you can suss out the organisation or the clinic's approach and your availability to progress your career or develop your career. So some of this would be thinking, are there potential options and avenues to upskill, or is there even just support to engage in CPD activities? So this may look like a CPD allowance or the clinic organising CPD events, whether or not they're in-house or having an external provider come in to do things. Another thing might be they may not provide you a CPD allowance to pay for CPD, but they may give you 1 day's leave per year where you can go off and do your CPD. So that's paid leave to undertake CPD. So when you come across an organisation that does this, even if they're not able to provide a huge amount of that sort of one-on-one and face-to-face mentorship or coaching, they may have other avenues in place to help with your career development and progression. So that's just one thing. If you've got someone or an organisation that recognises and has a few ways, the strategies in place where you can explore and expand your skill set, it usually highlights that this is somewhat important to them and they consider it important for their staff. So that's one way. And some clinics, again, when they know that this is their strong suit and they're looking to attract suitable employees, that'll be something that they put in their advertisement. So CPD allowance and regular CPD events or in-house CPD. So when that's happening, you know that for the most part, because sometimes people talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. But for the most part, the clinics that really do promote that as being a large part of their work culture and the benefits of joining their organisation, if they're promoting that, then it usually is something that they value highly. And if you value that highly, that's more compatible. Where some red flags come into it is if you have no mention of this. So say you're someone that you really want to develop your skills and there's no mention of career development or anything like that. First up, that in itself may not be a red flag, because it can be one of two things. One, it could just be they haven't thought to mention this in that part of it may just be the job advertisement or the early stages of discussions. It may not have been mentioned. Because one thing to consider is when we're going through university, we're trained to be health practitioners. We're not trained to be business owners. We're not trained to be employers. So from that whole HR, career development, all of the business practice perspective, most of the time we're learning on the fly. So if you've got a clinic that is probably a small clinic, it may be a solo practitioner, you may be the first employee that they've looked to put on, or it may be they've only had 1 or 2 employees over the years. So it may not be something that they think that, oh, I should be promoting this. So they may value it, they may just not have been aware that they need to promote that. So that's option 1. So it's not a red flag if that's the situation. Having a conversation is how you'll figure this out. But where it is a little bit of a flag, and this is where it's seen and it highlights if they just generally don't care or it's not as a priority. If you ask about, are there any avenues to engage in CPD or support for you to engage in CPD, and they just say no, then yeah, they either don't care or it's not a priority. So if it's something that you value and then that's a response that you get, then that's probably a little bit of an incompatibility that exists there. So that's another thing to consider. And also, if you're an employer tuning in, this in itself is probably a good self-reflection piece. So I've run through this, and I mentioned it earlier in the episode, that it's one thing that I have done with a few coaching clients this year, that there's been a few issues with staff turnover and they just haven't been able to figure out why they can't keep their staff. And then when we've explored what did they want and what could you offer, and that incompatibility, and sometimes it is that mentoring support or the CPD support, and the employer just doesn't have the time or the financial capacity to meet that need. So it's something that if those conversations happen very early on in the piece, you can potentially avoid the complete frustration that occurs when you lose a staff member and then you've got this patient list that you need to support and have replaced. So last up, we've got self-actualization or self-fulfillment. And in a clinical sense, this is sort of how much of your take and input you're allowed to or able to have in the clinic. And are you welcome to sharing your ideas in the clinic? So what this may look like is, are you going to be following established protocols with little room for improvement? Are you going to be ignored because you're a new grad and your boss, who's been practicing for 20 years, knows everything, and you're a new grad, therefore you know nothing? So yes, it sounds a little bit cynical of me, but it very much happens, and it's something that I find quite disheartening and frustrating, because I feel that our newer podiatrists or health practitioners, physios, whoever we're talking about, because it exists across the entire allied health space, is I feel like our new graduates and recent graduates have a huge amount that they can contribute. There's new ideas, there's new literature that comes through, and I've found that I've learned probably almost as much from new and recent graduates as I do as from people that have been practicing for 10, 15, 20 years longer than I have. So this is because there's a couple of different things that exist. So experience plays into a lot of things that we may need to see in clinical practice and get a handle on things. But then also new eyes and new ideas also play into it, and both are equally as important. So I feel it's insane when people are really condescending towards new graduates, and if a new graduate or recent graduate has an opinion and they're just being completely swept to the side because, well, how long have you been practicing for? Oh, 2 years. Well, I've been practicing for 20, so shut up. I think you need to put your ego in check if you're someone that does that, to be honest. But anyway, rant for another day. So as a new graduate, the self-actualization part, it might look a little bit different, but it's something that, even just the ability to contribute ideas within your organization is sort of the crux of that. And it may even be like, are you able to contribute to the social media accounts? Are you encouraged to write blogs? Are there strict protocols in place that you need to follow? So looping back around, we're just going to wrap these elements up. Now, unfortunately, as a new graduate, there's no definitive answer for you, but hopefully with these questions and the self-reflection, it will give you a little bit of an idea on what your ultimate balance will look like. So first up, pay and remuneration. Is the pay enough to meet your needs and possibly wants, if we've got the cream on top? Now, depending on your country, are you going to be paid super and or have health benefits? Now, for those in Australia, luckily, the ATO in recent years has clamped down significantly on those employers that were getting people onto a contract so they could scoot around paying super, but it was very obvious an employer-employee arrangement. So thankfully, it's a lot harder for them to scoot out of that, and it will hopefully save people being shortchanged out of tens of thousands of dollars in super that many of us from older vintages of podiatry practice have experienced. Anyway, next up, mentoring and coaching. And that face-to-face, or it doesn't have to be face-to-face, but that support of you in the workplace to foster your skills and help settle you in. The mentoring and coaching, what's being offered? How often is it being offered? And very importantly, is it scheduled? One thing to always keep at the front of your mind is things that get scheduled get done. If there's no plan and a regular set plan of when these meetings are going to occur, you can almost guarantee it will fall to the wayside very, very quickly. So next up is the social needs and engagement. And this is often more, like I said, getting the vibe and also asking the questions about what the company has to offer. So this one can be a little bit harder for those nuanced things. And sometimes, again, you don't realize what it's like until you're actually in there. So another thing is, well, one of the ways that you can get this information is if you do have an employer that's very much promoting it as one of their draw cards. That's probably one of the biggest hints that you'll get. So a little bit harder for that one to address until you're in there. But when it comes to career progression, similar to the above, like I said, some companies have this as their draw card. So with this, they're quite clear on what they offer and where you can go within the organization or within building your skill set. Others won't. And like I said, this might be the smaller clinics or people that just don't care. So asking questions about the CPD opportunities that are available or what support is offered for you to pursue them. And then are there other avenues within the organisation that you may be able to progress into? So sometimes it's just asking questions like, after I get settled in, are there potential opportunities for me to take on more responsibilities within the clinic? If the answer is no, then that's no. Then if the answer is yes, explore it more, what it may look like, how often will we be reviewing my progress, what may need to be done what do I need to do or what do I need to achieve in order for this to happen. And again, if there's no structure to this, it can be a flag that whilst they say that, yes, career progression is important, it may not be something that is achievable or prioritized for you within the organization. Now, the second part to this answer is our deal breakers. And I'm very, very much an advocate for work-life boundaries, not work-life balance, because I think the problem that exists is oftentimes when we're thinking work-life balance, it's kind of a given and an expectation that work will encroach on life. Now, very occasionally, if this happens, I think that's fine, because there are the odd times that we do have to work late, stay late, see patients, we've got to write a few reports. When it's an outlier, that I don't feel that that's a problem, but when it becomes the norm and it's constantly encroaching, I feel that that's a problem. So if you're someone like me who's got a propensity for having work encroaching on your life quite regularly, I think it's very important to get strict on your boundaries and have them as a boundary. Don't allow that to be crossed. Another reason that this is important, and I feel it's very important for new grads to embrace this, is especially when we're new grads. So we're new to the profession, we might have a new job, we've got this motivation, we want to impress our employers, we want to change every patient's life. So we've got this high level of motivation. So at that point in time, we probably have a very large degree of emotional, mental, and physical capacity to completely throw ourselves into our job. But it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you can't really sustain, some people can, but for the most part, you can't really sustain that for the long term if that's what you're doing, and it's a fast track to burnout. So one thing that I think it very much pays to remember is we have a life outside of work, and at the end of the day, that's what matters. some people live to work, and that's fine, but most of us, we work to live. Some people disagree with me, and that's okay. This isn't their channel. So when it comes to the second part of compatibility for work and finding our ideal work situation, is identifying our deal breakers. How we can do this is just stopping and think about what really matters to us outside of work. There's some nuance to this. So we have our wants and our needs. Needs are the deal breakers. These are the things that you fundamentally need to function as a human and be happy and healthy and fulfilled. Wants are the areas of compromise. Like, it would be great if I could have this, but if I don't, it's not going to be detrimental to me as a human being. So some questions to ask, and there's lots of questions that you can ask, and everyone's different with what matters most to them. But some of the things are, do you need to have time during the week to exercise for mental and physical health? Does the potential work schedule allow this? Like, I'm very much someone who needs regular physical activity for mental health, for physical health. And if I'm not getting that, I get the SADs very, very quickly. And if I'm heading into that position, then my ability to deal with bullshit at work drops significantly. So for me, that is a deal breaker. If I'm going to take on a job that's going to eliminate my ability to engage in regular physical activity, and I also need a fair amount of sleep. So I don't think it's healthy to sacrifice sleep to exercise and all of that happening because of work. Anyway, so for me, that's very important. But then some other fundamental needs for people are, do you need to pick your children up from school on some days or every day of the week? Does your work schedule allow for this? Do you definitely not want to work on Saturdays or do late shifts because you've got social activities that you want to enjoy? So for some people, they might play soccer on Tuesday nights, and they've been doing this for years. That's their social outlet, it's their physical outlet, and it brings you a huge amount of joy. Think about it. If that wasn't in your life and you were sacrificing that to see 2 or 3 patients, and it meant a huge amount to you, and how much you would miss it. So for some people, it just may be a want that they want to play soccer on Tuesdays. That's fine. If it's a want, you might go, I could do something else. Then it might be okay. But if it's something that you need because you enjoy it so much and it's something that you would truly, truly miss if it wasn't there, then it's completely fine to have that as a deal breaker. Again, there's no right or wrong answer with this. It's just the things that you need to be happy and fulfilled outside of work. And like I said, it varies for everyone. But when we're thinking about this, we need to get really real about the things that we need outside of work. And it's just, if we're compromising on some of these fundamental needs, you can almost guarantee it will be a fast track to disengagement very quickly. And then we've got our wants, which they're the things that it's up for compromise. The things that can be compromised, if there's a lot of other positives that you can draw from the job, but then there's just some things that, yes, I would like this, but I can't have that, that's okay. So do you have the capacity to work, say, 40 hours a week? But realistically, because of where you're at in life and financially, you only need to work 20, but they want you to work 30. Like, that's potentially an area of compromise where it's not a fundamental need that's going to be violated if it doesn't happen. So I can guarantee, if you accept a job that encroaches on something that is a fundamental need or something you really don't want to do, you're going to head into disengagement and resentment really, really quickly. So for deal breakers, I wouldn't sit down and create a 50-point checklist because that's a little bit unrealistic. But if you've got a few of your definite essentials that you need and you can't compromise on these, that's a really good starting point to sit down, and that's what you will sort of peg the potentially suitable jobs against. And then once you're filtering into the next step of the process is how you're going to get your needs met potentially within that job. So that's kind of my take on things. And when we combine them all together, much like dating and the work relationships that I'll occasionally blog about, is we, again, need to start with our deal breakers first and then we have a look at our areas of compromise, and then it's sort of the compatibility. So it is actually kind of like when we're going through the dating process. So objectively, you might look on paper and go, yep, there's some compatibility points. Are they a smoker? That's a huge deal breaker for me. So combining everything together and wrapping things up, I really hope this has given you a little bit of clarity with a very nuanced answer into how you can come up with your ultimate new grad balance when you're entering the workforce. Now, I really enjoyed putting this episode together, and I would love your feedback. So whatever platform that you're engaging with this on, if you can leave a comment, do that. If not, you can always contact me, p3podiatry@gmail.com, or it's usually best via Instagram if you can't do email, @p3podiatry is the handle there. And would always appreciate the like, shares, and subscribes. If you know someone that would benefit from listening to this episode, feel free to tag them. Again, really enjoyed it. Looking forward to the next episode, and I'll catch you then. Cheers.